And welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from one fan's real, honest perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 92. This is the Week 1 preview episode. First week of the NFL season is already underway. I'm excited. I hope you are excited for this first Bengals game of the season. And what better way to start it off than with a game against the arch rival Cleveland Browns, Battle of Ohio Part 1. It's going to be an AFC North divisional rivalry matchup to kick this season off with a bang. So we're going to cover all the important storylines we need to be watching for, important players, matchups, changes from the offseason, the recent history and trends of these teams, and basically just what you need to know. It's going to be a quick preview episode. We're not going to go too in-depth because these teams are already pretty familiar with each other. If you're a Bengals fan and you're hardcore, you already know about the Bengals team, and you probably already know about the Browns too. And in past years, it feels like the Browns have had the Bengals number, but recently that's actually not been the case. I mean, it just felt that way, but in reality, the Bengals have won the last 4 out of 5 games against the Browns and are on a 3-game win streak. The Bengals have won 3 in a row. This could be their 4th win in a row, and I think the longest streak the Bengals have ever had was 7 wins in a row back in the 2012 to 2017 days when the Bengals were going to the playoffs every year. And well, we won't worry about what happened in the playoffs, but they went to the playoffs almost every year, and the Browns were terrible. And that was a great series of years, no doubt. So hopefully the Bengals can get back to those type of days. And going into this season, on paper, that's kind of what it was setting up to be. I mean, you know, when the Browns are rolling out Joe Flacco, 40 years old, as their starting quarterback, they've got to be tanking, right? They're not seriously trying to win games, and they've got one hand tied behind their back because their supposed franchise quarterback, Deshaun Watson, got hurt, tore his Achilles in that first game against the Bengals last season. He hasn't played since then. He had to have a second surgery in the winter because apparently he re-aggravated or re-tore that Achilles somehow. He's been talking about coming back, but he's still on the physically unable to perform list. That means that all that money is basically dead money. The Browns aren't able to invest in other quality players. That should be one advantage that the Bengals have because, as we know, Mike Brown detests wasting money and having dead cap money on that Bengals roster. So there's very little dead cap for the Bengals. And that means the Bengals should have, theoretically, more skilled players on the field. But as we saw at the beginning of last season, the New England Patriots had the lowest paid roster in the NFL, and they came out and whooped up on the Bengals at home. We can't take anything for granted. Like they say, any given Sunday, any team in the NFL could potentially beat any other team. Now, the Bengals are favored by 5.5 points in this game. Favored by 5.5. It was 4.5 maybe earlier in the week, but I think it's back to 5.5. The over-under is 48.5 points. Most people are picking the Bengals to win this comfortably, and that should be the expectation because there's no excuses, or I don't want to hear any excuses. There shouldn't be any excuses for the Bengals heading into this game. Everybody's healthy. There's no contract disputes to worry about. Nobody had to sit out any games. You know, Trey Hendrickson, he missed training camp, but he got his contract, or he got his pay basically doubled from $16 to $30 million. And he still had 2 weeks to prepare, and he's a veteran. He's been in the league. He knows how to prepare and get himself ready to play. Assuming that he was keeping somewhat good care of himself, he should be in shape enough to play week 1. Now it's going to come down to, was that a good decision? If you're Mike Brown and the Bengals ownership, they're saying, okay, we went back and forth with Trey Hendrickson about him wanting a raise. We gave him the raise. Now he's got to go out there and prove that he deserves the raise. If you're Trey Hendrickson, you don't want to go out there and, just come up empty in terms of on the stat sheet. You want to have some quarterback pressures, maybe even a sack or two on Joe Flacco. Get him moving off of his spot. Don't let Joe Flacco just sit back there in the pocket with all day to pick the Bengals defense apart. We also need to see rookie Shamar Stewart put some pressure on Joe Flacco, even if he doesn't get the sacks, which was kind of his biggest knock coming out of college. He only had 4.5 career sacks at Texas A&M. But can he at least put Joe Flacco under that same kind of pressure? If we have two guys, Hendrickson and Stewart, coming off the edge, we might see Joseph Osai as well. But the Browns are probably going to want to have a heavy balance of the running game as well and not just rely exclusively on the passing game and Joe Flacco and David Njoku, the tight end. But the Browns have a reshuffled offensive line. I think they got a new offensive line coach. They brought in, they're going to start DeJuan Jones, Joel Bitonio, Ethan Pocic, or however you say that, the center. Ethan Pocic, I don't know, whatever. I'll figure it out eventually. Pocic, something like that. He got hurt in the preseason. I think he had a knee sprain, but apparently he's going to be able to play in this game. And then they got Wyatt Teller at the right guard, Jack Conklin at right tackle for the Browns. They signed Tevin Jenkins from the Bears in the offseason, but he is a backup at the moment. But that just shows you the depth that the Browns have on their offensive line. Now, the Bengals tried to do their part and get a little bit of depth on the offensive line by signing Dalton Reisner, but that was after Cordell Volson already went on injured reserve. So the Bengals still really only have 9 offensive linemen: Cody Ford, Jalen Rivers, Matt Lee, Dalton Reisner as the backups. The player everybody is going to kind of have their eye on, or the two players probably on the offensive line, everybody's talking about the guard play, because everybody assumes Orlando Brown Jr. and Amarius Mims are going to be fine at tackle. Ted Karras, who just signed a contract extension. Good for Ted Karras. He signed a 1-year contract extension through 2026. So not just this season that's about to begin, but also next season. And so he's not playing out on like a contract year, basically. He's got 1 extra year beyond this one, Ted Karras. And that's kind of what the Bengals used to do with Marvin Lewis as the head coach. When Marvin was kind of on the way out, they weren't sure they wanted to commit to Marvin Lewis as the head coach. But the Bengals organization always wants that consistency between the coaches. So they were always giving Marvin that 1-year extension. Okay, this year and one more. Okay, one more. All right. It's kind of how, at the bar, the bartender asks, "You want another drink?" And it's like, I probably shouldn't, but yeah, one more. That's how they did with Marvin Lewis, and that's what they're doing with Ted Karras. Hopefully, Ted Karras has plenty of gas left in the tank. But it's always kind of one of the things where I'm assuming the team, before they want to sign up for a player for another year, they always get these deals done right at the end of training camp. It's kind of like, okay, how does this guy look after he's been away all summer and coming back? Is he in shape? Does he look older and slower? And that's kind of what they want to tell from guys before they give them the contract extension. Some of the guys like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, yeah, you can get them signed early in the offseason because they're young. They're not going to go downhill, but there's been some rumblings out there about, is Logan Wilson going to regain the early career form that he once had under Al Golden when he was a young player? Now, Logan Wilson, let me check. How old is Logan Wilson? He's 29. He just turned 29. And he's coming into it's going to be his 6th season in the NFL, same as Joe Burrow. He was a little bit on the older side. I think he had to be 23 coming out of the draft. So I think he was like a 5th-year player coming out of Wyoming. Getting close to 30. And when we say, the average NFL career is only 3 or 4 years. So this is year 6 for Logan Wilson. He's already kind of played more than most players. I wouldn't expect him to completely fall off a cliff, and I know the Bengals don't want him to completely fall off a cliff because I know he's still under contract for a couple more years after this, at least. I don't think this is his contract season. They signed him to, an extension 2 years ago to a 4-year deal. Yeah, so he's going to be with the Bengals for another couple seasons. But people were saying in the preseason, including me, Logan Wilson looks kind of slow out there. And there was it wasn't just him. It was Demetrius Knight, the rookie, along with Logan Wilson, and some of the other defensive linemen were way out of position on some of these running plays we had seen. And especially against the Commanders, where they were averaging like 17 yards per play against the Bengals defense. Guys were just not in the right spots. They were like zigged when they should have zagged. They, instead of taking on the block, they like jumped out of the way of the block and let the guy run right by him. And a lot of that was attributed by Al Golden of saying, we're just playing vanilla. We're not really showing what we want to do. We're not really showing our true identity of our defensive scheme. We're not playing with all the cards that we're really going to have in the regular season. Again, there's no more excuses. They can't say they didn't play with their full complement of plays and whatever. Like, they got to go up there and actually play some defense against the Cleveland Browns team that has been watching that tape in the preseason just like everybody else. And I'm sure they're going to try to run it right up the middle and take advantage of the perceived weakness in the Bengals defense. The Bengals signed TJ Slayton from the Packers in the offseason, and they also have BJ Hill in that defensive interior, who is supposed to be 100% healthy coming off of a foot injury. And then behind them, they're going to have McKinley Jackson, Chris Jenkins, and then they just signed Mike Pennell off of the Chiefs, or I think he got released by the Chiefs, and the Bengals signed him to their practice squad. And as I had predicted, the Bengals are going to elevate Mike Pennell from the practice squad to the game day roster. So it's kind of one of those logistical things where the Bengals don't want to have him on the active roster for week 1, otherwise his salary would be guaranteed. So they're leaving him intentionally on the practice squad so his salary won't be guaranteed, but he's obviously going to play in the game. And Howard Cross is definitely going to be inactive. So did they, it's these roster gymnastics types of moves of, well, why did they have to have Howard Cross so bad on the roster? Why couldn't they put him on the practice squad and have one of these other, whatever. So Mike Pennell is probably going to be coming in at nose tackle if and when McKinley Jackson needs a break or isn't very effective. We'll have to see what these guys on defense looks like. And they're actually listing on ESPN.com. Am I reading this right? They're listing 12 players. Am I reading this right? Wait a minute. Because they've got, something. ESPN.com has their website messed up. They're listing 12 starters on the Bengals defense in the base 4-3, but they're also listing Dax Hill as the nickel cornerback. So they've got 3 linebackers, like 5 defensive backs, and 4 defensive linemen, which is more players than you're allowed to have on the field at once, ESPN.com. But they're listing Demetrius Knight Jr., Logan Wilson, and Oren Burks as starting linebackers. I don't think we'll have to see what they come out with. Al Golden's defense is a mystery to everybody. But the question is, can they put pressure on the quarterback to force the ball out of his hands quickly. And what kind of a defense are they going to play in terms of how much man and how much zone defense are they going to play? Last year, maybe in part because they couldn't get any pass rush. They couldn't get any pressure on the quarterback. They were playing a lot of zone defense. But the Bengals defensive backs, especially Cam Taylor-Britt, was not good at playing zone defense. You could say probably better at man-to-man coverage. That's going to be the question. Will Al Golden play more man? And if so, how are they going to stop the run? Because if the guys are playing man defense, they're going to have their backs turned. That's going to make it a lot easier for teams, offenses to complete things like screen passes out of the backfield, delayed running plays where the linebackers and defensive backs are going to be turning and running and not going to be able to react as quickly to come up and make a tackle in the running game. I know the Browns have a reputation of being a very strong running franchise, and that's kind of how they're set up still even now. The Bengals, like I said, Bengals have won 3 in a row. I should be confident that they're going to have no problem taking care of the Browns, even though it's in Cleveland. Week 1, you never know. Like I said, I felt really good about the Bengals playing the Patriots when they were like 8.5-point favorites at home last year, and then they lost to the Patriots. So I am going to just temper my enthusiasm just a bit. I'm still going to be excited. I'm still expecting and hoping for a Bengals win, but I see better than I hear. And the Bengals coaches and players have been saying all the right things, but I need to see it on Sunday before I actually let myself believe it. It's almost too good to be true. The way that they've been talking about everything was just perfect leading up to training camp. Nobody got injured. And the remarkable thing was nobody was listed by the Bengals on their injury report at all. Not even questionable or limited or anything. Nobody had any designation for any type of injury whatsoever, which is the first time I have seen that. And I don't know how long. Maybe in Zach Taylor's entire coaching career, this might be the first time there's never been an injury listed at all, which is good and encouraging on the one hand, but also makes me just kind of suspicious because it's almost like too good to be true. Everybody says, after training camp and all these preseason games, like there's going to be some pulled muscles, some fatigue. Everybody's got a little bit of something at this point, but the Bengals are claiming that everybody is 100% healthy. Of course, we know it's never going to stay that way. After the first game, there's going to be bumps and bruises, and something will come up surely throughout the season. But week 1, no excuses in terms of injuries, no excuses in terms of holding anything back, and hopefully no excuses about the weather. There's no rain in the forecast. And Jamar Chase in his press conference made a joke about that. He also made a great joke about the dog pound. And that's the one thing I like about watching Jamar Chase's press conferences as opposed to a Zach Taylor press conference, which is a complete waste of time. I watch every Zach Taylor press conference and then I immediately forget every single word that he said. Nothing sticks in my mind because nothing he said has any importance. It's all a bunch of made up nonsense that doesn't mean anything. It's all this coach speak. Just nothing. It's just nothing. And then a lot of it gets repeated by Joe Burrow. But for whatever reason, when Joe Burrow says it, it sounds more intriguing. Zach Taylor, just his delivery, just the look on his face, just everything about Zach Taylor. Some people out there must like Zach Taylor for him not to be fired by now. But for me, I've never liked Zach Taylor. I'm not going to even try to pretend like I like Zach Taylor. I don't like Zach Taylor. I think he's a bad play caller. He's got this, since he went to the Super Bowl as the offensive play caller, it's like confirmed in his mind that he knows what he's doing and he must be the one to call the plays. But in Cleveland, Kevin Stefanski, he has been coach of the year, something Zach Taylor's never been. And he gave up the responsibility of calling the offensive plays because he decided as head coach, he needed to take a more high-level, coaching the whole team kind of approach. And he let his offensive coordinator call the plays, and now he is just the head coach, as a lot of other coaches do. Not every coach, you still see the Andy Reids and Brian Schottenheimer for the Cowboys. We saw him calling his plays. Sean McVay, obviously, for the Rams, calls his own plays. And even some of the defensive coaches will call their own plays on defense. It's not unheard of, but if you ask who are the best play callers in the NFL, nobody would name Zach Taylor as one of those top play callers. So the idea that he's so protective and defensive, and when they start losing games, they're always asking, would you give up play calling? And he gets super defensive and says, no, never. He would rather die than let somebody else call the plays. And I think he feels like if somebody else starts calling the plays, he's not in control anymore, or maybe that's a sign that he's going to get fired or he's expendable if he's not the one calling the plays. I don't know what it is, but he's just not that good at it. And I would rather, actually, like I've been saying, I wouldn't rather him be like the overall head coach. I'd rather him just not be the coach at all. Get a different. Actually, I wanted Lou Anarumo to be the head coach. I wanted Zach Taylor to be fired, Lou Anarumo to take over as head coach because he was way cooler. But that's not going to happen. They fired Lou Anarumo instead, which was dumb. So now they're stuck with Zach Taylor, who is a complete milquetoast, nothing personality, who's not a leader of men. But like Ja'Marr Chase said in his interview, the reporters, they try to go along with this story of, did what the coaches do, did the coaches set up training camp to make it more competitive so you guys would be ready to go week one? And Jamar's reaction was kind of like, what did the coaches have to do with anything? Like, coaches aren't going to do shit. We have to be the ones who are going to be competitive and physical and all that. They can try to make it that way, but at the end of the day, it's up to the players. And that's basically how I feel too. Like the reporters try to put so much importance on Zach Taylor as if he is the one who's giving the team their attitude, telling them how to act, how to do things. I mean, who really listens to Zach Taylor, honestly? I wouldn't if I was a player. And I agree with Ja'Marr Chase. It's got to be a self-motivation. It has to come from within. It's not going to come from Zach Taylor. Nothing Zach Taylor says to you as a player is going to get you fired up and inspired and be competitive and aggressive and all that stuff. Zach Taylor is just like, I don't even know what you would call him. He's just there. He's just kind of there. He's like those dummies that you put in your car when you want to go in the carpool lane and you want to fool the cops into thinking you've got multiple occupants in your vehicle. You could get Zach Taylor and have him sit there and they'd probably pull you over and be like, oh, no, that's a dummy. I see what you're on to. Like, no, this is actually Zach Taylor. Like, whatever. The point is, Ja'Marr Chase is more interesting when he's giving his press conferences. And what he said was that he always had a dream of jumping into the dog pound. I think, who was it? I think it was Joe Mixon that tried to jump into the dog pound and somebody like pushed him back down onto the ground or something like that. So Ja'Marr Chase was talking about he wants to jump up into the dog pound. And then Ben Baby from ESPN asked him if that was actually going to be on the table. And Ja'Marr said, nah, he wouldn't do that because he said he heard they stab people in the dog pound. So that was funny. That got a good laugh out of people. And he even said, he was just playing around because he thought people took things in these press conferences too serious. And he liked talking trash to the Browns defensive backs and getting inside their head. I think Ja'Marr may have even gotten a personal foul penalty against the Browns because he was getting a little bit too involved with the trash talk with them. But that's going to be another matchup to watch. Is going to be these Bengals wide receivers going up against the Browns defensive backs, particularly Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome II. Now, the Browns lost one of their key nickel cornerbacks in Martin Emerson Jr., but they think they have enough to make up for that. They've got Cameron Mitchell, Ronnie Hickman, Greg Newsome, Grant Delpit, Denzel Ward in their defensive backfield. Linebackers for the Browns, there's going to be Devin Bush, Mohamed Diabate, and then the rookie Carson Swessinger, second-round pick. Swessinger was the linebacker who was taken not immediately before Demetrius Knight Jr. by the Bengals, but all of the linebackers who were taken in the draft, Swessinger was the third one taken, I want to say, and then Demetrius Knight was Swessinger was the second, Demetrius Knight was the third linebacker taken. So that's going to be kind of the, not really a head-to-head matchup, but all of those rookie middle linebackers, who plays better? Basically, who got the better draft pick? Browns pick first, and Swessinger, he should be the better player. And what we saw at Demetrius Knight wasn't that promising. But there's going to be some youth on the defense. Also for the Browns, their top 5 pick, Mason Graham, out of Michigan. He's the defensive tackle that people were kind of saying, well, is he kind of undersized? Is he going to really be worth that draft pick? Let's see. The Browns traded away their second overall pick. They could have had Travis Hunter, but instead they traded down. They're going to have a couple first-round draft picks in the coming year, so that'll make the Browns better, but not this year, not this game. The only thing they got for it to speak of is a a 5th overall pick in Mason Graham. Mike Hall Jr., the Browns' second-round pick from last season, is going to be out for this game with a knee injury. And I don't know if the Browns have a lot of depth at the defensive interior. Not that they would necessarily need it going up against this Bengals offense, because as we know, Bengals traditionally under Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor have been more of a shotgun, run it only when they absolutely have to. And I wouldn't expect that to change much this season, given the fact that they got Chase Brown, Samaje Perine, and Taj Brooks. All of those are kind of more third down, pass protection heavy running backs. Not going to give you a ton of production in the running game, but Chase Brown, a lot of people have high hopes for him, especially in the fantasy football community. Everybody's expecting Chase Brown to go over 1,500 all-purpose yards rushing and receiving. Hopefully that's true. If he would have played as the starting running back and gotten his entire season workload, he would have surpassed those numbers. But the question is going to be, can Chase Brown stay healthy? He's not the biggest guy, and he's not the youngest guy either. I want to say he was a 5th-year senior coming out of Illinois. So if we check Chase Brown, he's 25, not that old. But for a running back, that's not that young either. This is going to be basically the prime of Chase Brown's career. They're going to run him into the dirt, basically. And then next year, hopefully he can come back for another season. Mike Gesicki and Noah Fant, those are the 2 big-name tight ends for this Bengals offense. And, of course, I've gone this whole time without mentioning Joe Burrow. This is going to be Joe Burrow's first training camp of completely healthy. All of his wide receivers are coming back. His offensive line is looking good. He's not coming off of any rehab or illness or anything, contract dispute or anything that's going to distract Joe Burrow. So that should be everything the Bengals really need. As long as the defense can hold the Browns to a respectable amount of points, and as long as the Bengals offensive line is able to hold up against Myles Garrett and the rest of the Browns defensive line, but they don't have that big name defensive end on the opposite. Like the Browns had Zadarius Smith and Jadeveon Clowney in past years. This year, they don't have anybody like that. Alex Wright is the other defensive end, and he's only got a handful of sacks in his career. So it's really going to be a question of, can the Bengals and Amarius Mims, most likely, maybe a little bit of Orlando Brown Jr., can they stop or slow down Myles Garrett. It's going to be impossible to completely stop Myles Garrett, number 95 for the Browns, but can they at least not have him completely blow up plays and, end up in second and long, third and long? That's not the situations that you want to be in. And one of my friends was asking me a couple years ago when the Browns were constantly beating up on the Bengals, like, why did the Bengals lose so bad? And the answer was just like, well, the Browns had Myles Garrett and the Bengals didn't. And that was pretty much the long and short of how the game went. So the Bengals have to make sure that Myles Garrett doesn't become the deciding factor in this game. If they can make Myles Garrett look like just any other ordinary football player and not the best defensive player in the NFL, they should come out with the victory. If Myles Garrett goes off and has multiple sacks and causes a fumble or something like that, Bengals might be in a little bit of trouble. But it's going to be a game on Fox. Let's see, who is announcing this game? Interesting. They're going to have Kevin Kugler on the play-by-play and Daryl Moose Johnston on the color analysis. I actually like Moose Johnston on the color commentary. He's usually got some good insights and some good analysis of the blocking, the offensive linemen, fullbacks, all that kind of stuff. Being a former player, former Super Bowl champ, Moose is pretty good at what he's doing. I think they got Laura Oakman, but it's going to be a 1 o'clock game, not prime time, no rain, maybe a little bit of wind, but other than that, smooth sailing. Maybe Charlie Jones can get another special teams touchdown. Last year against the Browns, he had that kickoff return for a touchdown. The kicking game is going to play a increasingly important role this season, so watch out for those kickoff returns from Charlie Jones and the Bengals. And hopefully Evan McPherson is able to get a good snap from his new long snapper, William Wagner, nail all of his kicks. The Browns are going with a new place kicker this year. They got rid of, was it Dustin Hopkins last year? He was terrible last year. So they got this guy, Andre Smith. I don't know. He's probably from Switzerland or something, but I don't know. He's 26 years old. No stats in the NFL, so he has never kicked in the NFL. He won the 2018 Lou Groza Award, which is the best kicker in college. So he must not have been that bad, but he's never been on an NFL roster before. This is going to be his first NFL game. So hopefully the Bengals should have the advantage in that regard because they got Evan McPherson. He's experienced. And don't forget, this year the NFL is letting the kickers work in the balls in advance of the game. They used to have it where they were basically like brand new out of the box, like still with all the firmness and stiffness of a brand new football. That would be the balls that they would have to kick in the game, which didn't make any sense. I guess they were thinking like they don't want the kickers to get some kind of secret extra advantage, with special kicking balls. But then they realized, oh, wait, we want to actually have people scoring more points. And one way to do that is have better balls to kick with so they make more points. So I think you're going to see not only in terms of distance, but accuracy improvements all over the league, Bengals included. So Evan Money McPherson, he should be drilling like 60-yard field goals in his sleep is what I'm trying to get at. Hopefully that's the case. And I'm going to go out on a limb. I usually don't make predictions, but just for this game, I'm going to make a prediction. I'll say the Bengals will win, but they're not going to cover the spread. I'm going to say it's going to be 24-20 Bengals. Bengals are going to win by 4, but the Browns keep it close. So hopefully I'm right, and we'll break it all down on the next episode after the game to discuss the recap, everything that happened before, during, and after the game. Hoping for a good injury report. Nothing crazy tomorrow. I mean, last season, just think about this. Last season, not only were the Bengals dealing with a contract dispute with Jamar Chase, where it wasn't even sure whether he was going to play in the first game, and then he came down with food poisoning like the 2 nights before the game, and then T. Higgins the Friday before the game pulled his hamstring, and then he was out for that game. And there was just so many things going on that just made it so stressful and anxiety-inducing to get ready for week 1 last year. This year, completely different. Everybody's feeling good. Nobody has any food poisoning. Nobody's injured. They're all ready to go. So they better win. That's all I said. No excuses. Got to win the game. Come on, Bengals. Or else we're firing up the get Zach Taylor out of town bandwagon sooner than expected. But certainly that won't be happening. We're going to have a great week 1. Joe Burrow is going to play out of his mind, and we'll be able to celebrate. So join me in the next episode. But until then, I'm going to leave you with a hoo-day and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.